welcome to fmtraining.tv. My name is Margaret. I'll be your broadcast engineer for today. Hope you're all having a lovely day. Just saw a really awesome message in Discord, which I'm probably going to read out loud. But hi, Wim. How you doing? How's life treating you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. It is Friday, which means that we are going to have a fun. I mean, we're always having a fun time. This whole week has been actually really fun. But we're gonna have an extra fun time because I'm sure a lot of you are looking forward to whatever weekend shenanigans are coming up to you. So, real quick, we're gonna recap this a little bit, which is Wim is finishing up a week of us going over AI from the very, very basics to how it begins to work in FileMaker with a particular eye towards server. This has been really important. FileMaker 2025 released as of July 8th, and with it came a host of AI features, like substantial. So, and AI is kind of a new thing right now, and most of us, frankly, haven't been really using it. Like, we're all kind of aware that AI is super cool, but we're like, okay, this is cool, but how do I actually use this? And with 2024, while there was really cool embedding stuff, I think most of us hadn't really wrapped our heads around, actually applying it into your database yet. But with this release, we really wanted to like help people get off the ground with these features. So Wim has been very gracious, and Todd is going to be very gracious with giving us a week of their time. I can assure you, both of them are incredibly busy. They are long-standing pinnacles of the FileMaker community, and having them both on to discuss this with us and help drag us into the future with them is greatly appreciated. Related to that, there's a really cool comment from Stefane. If I have mispronounced your name, I am very sorry. With the Wim, you've got me hooked real time. This has been a really great way to begin the journey with the basics that you showed us this week. So, uh,
That's beautiful. I love it.
I
Yeah.
know it's cool. It reminds me. I really love. I've hosted this show now for like closing on 3 years. I think it's actually four. Me and my father argue over how long I've actually been doing it because he did it for the whole time during the pandemic, and then I picked it up. I think in 2021, early 2021. Anyway, but it's here. We're here to help the FileMaker community. It's a really big part of what we do. And it's really great to have people on who can help us with that, and to have you here who all sit here and watch us and learn and improve your FileMaker databases, and therefore improve all your customers' lives. Frankly, databases are just a way of improving lives by making people much less stressed. So, uh, real quick, you can see the schedule. The schedule, we're finishing up with Wim. We're going to go with Todd. And we're starting from the beginning over with Todd again, and then Todd will go through what he wants to talk about. Wim and I were speculating he probably have a lot of MCP adventures. Oh, look, there it is, right on Wednesday. So I imagine we'll be talking about that. I have a question, Wim. Do you want me to start with the question, or do you want to save the question till later? It's
No,
about
no, we can do it right now.
the question is, with OpenAI model, why, if I ask with the prompt, have you access to the web, I get a response that it is not possible in this version. So is there another model that will have the same response? What am I missing?
It's a really good question. It's let's see. I'll bring up something on the screen while we're talking about it. This goes back to something that we discussed, I think, Tuesday, maybe Wednesday. Um,
The tools, right?
the tools, spot on. Actually, that's not the script, but I wanted to see my script. Remember, a model has no a model is just a binary file, right? Stuffed with numbers. On its own, it can't do anything else. It's not able to do any actions, right? It's there to basically give you answers. Going out on to the internet and retrieving something for you is an action. That's not what models do. Um, I should qualify that. That's not what models do out of the box, right? One of the things you can do with calling a model is you can basically give it tools, right? And the tools definition is just an empty calc window. That's what it is. But this is the feature that you can give tools to the model so that it can do other stuff, including going out to the internet. The example that we gave early in the week was I'm sitting here interacting with the chat model, and I want to know what the weather is in Antwerp, Belgium today or tomorrow, right? Remember, models are trained on a bunch of data, but point in time data, right? Whenever the model was created, if it's a fairly recent model, the data may be a couple of months old, but the model cannot know what the weather in Antwerp, Belgium is going to be today or tomorrow. Like that knowledge didn't exist at the time. So the only way for the model to know that is that if you tell it If you detect in my question, or based on the context, the conversation up to this point, that I want something that is weather for what looks like a city, like Antwerp, Belgium, then here's a tool that you can use. Like, and the tool in this case would be a weather API, right? And in the tool, you would describe where the weather API could be found and how to call it. At that point, it becomes just another API integration like we do from inside FileMaker. So that's how models know how to do things, right? Like reaching out to the internet. So that is supported with FileMaker, but a model in and by itself doesn't know how to do that unless you tell it how.
There you go. And then out of curiosity, like, is there anywhere we can go find tools? Like, or I'm sure there's write-ups on the tools that you can give certain models, or is there?
Yeah, and I don't have a resource handy, but if you were to Google, you'll find examples of how people do use tools and that kind of thing. Actually, let me see. Where would I have that open? Maybe here. Yep. This is the documentation for Open Web UI. Open Web UI is very interesting, right? So if you're used to the AI that OpenAI gives you, or Cohere or Claude or something like that, Open Web UI is basically an open source version of all of these things, right? So it's in essence a chat client that you can host yourself. You can download this and host your own one. All you need to do is hook it up to do some models, right? But it has these things called tools and functions. And so the documentation will actually give you some examples. So that's a good starting resource there.
All right, I think we're good otherwise. Let us know
Okay,
if you have any follow-up questions to Fane on that.
absolutely. Absolutely. This has been the theme for the week, right? So we're all at the beginning of this AI journey. And actually, Margaret and I were chatting about this, I believe, yesterday, in how great this community is. And you just touched on that, Margaret, right? Like I've been doing this 30 years in this community. And I was just telling Margaret my origin story before the thing. So I was actually doing a lot of non-FileMaker stuff before I started doing FileMaker stuff. And and dirty secret. I didn't like FileMaker when I first discovered it. I did not, right? And but this community that I found where I was asking questions as a youngster full of piss and vinegar, um, I'm hoping that nobody can find. At the time, we had email forums, like there were no online forums, right? I'm hoping that nobody can find those emails because I wasn't very kind. But the community is such a wonderful resource, right? Patient people who are still here, who were my mentors. Um, and so when people ask, like, why do you give all this stuff away, this knowledge? Well, one, it's what people did for me when I came up, right? And I wouldn't be in my place if I didn't have the help of those people that came before me. So I'm just paying it forward. And we shouldn't take this for granted because this community has had the same feel and vibe to it for the last 30 years. That's incredible.
Yeah,
That's
in
incredible, right? There's
internet
this
terms, that's
willingness to help each
insane.
other. I want to pick up some loose threads from yesterday before I move on. What I want to spend time on today is we've talked about the Claris AI model server. I want to talk some dollars and cents, right? Because we went through all the basics. We know what models are. We know how to deploy this. What does it mean to do this? And then if you don't like that, I want to propose some other options for deployments, right? Remember, at some point in the last 2 days, I showed a slide with the different skills that we will need to acquire to become good at this, or if not good, then at least proficient. And one of them is knowing all of your deployment options so that you can guide your client through the best choice for how to interact with OpenAI. And not just the best choice, right? But the most ethical, the thing that will guarantee the best protection and security for their data, all of these considerations. And also, of course, be cost effective. All right. So one loose thread is what's on the screen here, and that's when you go to your Claris AI model server, right? And I know for the people who haven't joined us the whole week, this looks like a FileMaker server. It is not. All right. So it is a Claris AI model server. You just use the FileMaker server installer to get there. Everything's off. There's no files hosted, as you can see. It's really all about this section. I have my AI model server running, and I have models, right? Claris gives us a couple of suggestions for model that we want to do, but if we want to add our own, it says model name. Like, where do you get that, right? Um, that goes back to what we have here in Hugging Face. We mentioned yesterday, this is the de facto repository for all of these things. This is the only place that you should be looking for models. Um, so you do your search based on what I mentioned yesterday. What's the task of the model? Is it an embedding model? Is it a text generation model? Um, if I'm on Apple hardware, I want to pick the MLX version of this because that's the ones that are configured to take the most advantage of that Apple hardware. And it's got to be a Transformers library, or it has to have Transformers library support, otherwise it won't work. So say that I have one. I'm picking one at random here, right? So this is really as simple as it is. Over here where the name is, there's this little copy button. That's really all you have to do. Copy this, go back to your server, paste it in, right? That's all the magic for doing this. I didn't have to tell it what kind of model is it. In my case, it's a text generation model, and I need to acknowledge that it's okay to go and download that. I won't do the actual add model because it'll go and download a couple of gigabytes worth of data, and we don't want to wait that out. But I didn't show that yesterday, but this is really how simple it is to add a model to your Claris AI model server.
That's very simple, which is really nice.
It really is, right? And so it really all comes down to spending your time in this interface to find the right model for what you want to achieve, right? And as you're experimenting with this, you'll be finding yourself doing this a fair bit, right? Where you find a model, then maybe it's not, the model won't run for whatever reason, and maybe it's not accurate enough, maybe it's too big for the machine that you have. So you'll get familiar with this interface and do a bunch of stuff.
And I assume that if I wanted to find like specialized task models, I would also find them on Hugging Face. Like if I wanted to like look for something that can identify, I think I saw the radiology was someone I saw asking for a model that focused on that.
Yep, absolutely. So if I do reset tasks, so these are all different tasks that a model can do, right?
Hmm.
So there's a bunch of them that you can like, and these will then point to specialization for those models, right? Uh,
Got it.
Now keep in
Okay.
mind that not all of these model types, if you will, are supported by the Claris AI model server, right? Because I'm not saying limited, because that's most of the use cases anyway, but we have text embedding, image embedding, and text generation. If you want to use other types of models, again, theme of the week, right? Like you're not dead in the water, you can still do that. And actually, we'll come to that in a couple of minutes.
Got it.
All right. So I mentioned that this is my AI model server, at least the machine that I'm running on. This is an Mac Studio M4 Max. It's got 128 gigs of RAM. I, I actually unloaded the model that we were using yesterday, so the memory usage is a lot lower than it was yesterday. But you'll need a good machine to run this under, right? And when we talked about the system specs, it's about two things, right? Graphical processing units, GPUs, not CPUs, GPUs. So having enough of those. But realistically, your bigger constraint is going to be the amount of video memory that is available in that machine. Apple hardware has something called unified, so it's the same. Like it doesn't make that distinction between memory for the CPUs and memories for the GPUs. Apple memory is unified, like it can serve both purposes. Uh, it's one of the reasons that Apple hardware costs what it costs, right? Like you buy a lot of flexibility with that. If you're on Linux and Windows, that video memory will come from the graphics card that you put in the machine, right? So it doesn't really matter how much memory the machine itself has. It's the memory on the graphics card that's going to determine that. So you gotta keep that in mind as you pick your machine. Um, People who've known me on the forums and all of that, I answer a lot of FileMaker server questions, right? I do a lot of troubleshooting and whatnot. So I'm a big believer in solid best practices for FileMaker server to make sure that you have the best possible uptime, the most performance, the most stability, and all of these things. It's actually one of the reasons that we don't use Apple hardware very much for FileMaker servers. We tend to prefer Windows or Linux boxes. Um, well, for one reason, in the virtual world on AWS, that's what you get, right? Like, yes, you can get a virtual, no, not even a virtual, you can get an actual Mac system there, but that's really not that world. I'm going to change my tune a little bit when it comes to AI model servers, right? Apple hardware is actually excellent for this. And for all of these reasons, it has a bunch of GPUs by default. I don't need to go out and get a graphics card to get it. And the memory is unified. The memory that's there can already serve as video memory. Um, and that's why my AI model server is a Mac Studio, right? I also have a Mac Mini, but don't go there. Well, I was going to say my Mac Mini has 16 gigs of RAM, so that's really not enough, right? You can max out a Mac Mini and get lots of memory in there. It's still going to be suboptimal, right? Because it just doesn't have the processing power. It has GPUs, don't get me wrong, just not powerful GPUs like an M3 Ultra would have. And we mentioned this in the last couple of days. The M3 Ultra, if you have to pick Apple hardware and budget is not a constraint, go for the M3 Ultra. It's hands down the single best machine to run or to serve as an AI model server. And we touched on the reason for that. It's the only machine that has the Apple neural network or the Apple neural engine installed. Like not even the M4 machines have that.
Someone asked, how about a multi-model? Like, are you asking the specs for a multi-model machine?
And to put it in context, multi-model when it comes to models means that it can take different types of inputs, right? Where you can give it a picture and then tell it to do something with that, or you can just give it text and then tell it with something to do something. Actually, you may have seen if I go back to my FileMaker server, this one. I may not have it loaded on this one, but some of these models are actually multimodal by default. So there's nothing wrong with multimodal engines. Again, if it's not one of the ones that Claris suggests that you use, because and we talked about this yesterday a little bit, the ones that Claris pre-configures for you, or the ones that they have done a bunch of testing with, right? So you can sort of assume that you'll get the best coverage of functionality and the least a number of surprises when you do that. But other than that, it's like this is a brand new world, right? Experiment. That's what this is all about. So Mac Studio like this one, it's a really good machine. Keep in mind, this one will set you back about $7,000 thereabouts, right? So they start at about $5,000, they go to about $10,000 for a machine like that. So we've had a lot of conversations with clients and even inside Solid with our developers about that. But okay, that sounds like a lot of money to have a server to do these kinds of things. And I'm not blind to that, right? Like, it's a capital outlay. It's money, right? Like it has to come from somewhere. However, how do you value your data security and privacy? Like how much money do you put on that, right? And I can't really. It's a bit of a flippant question, but to some extent it's not, right? And it's also one that I cannot answer for you. I think if I had sensitive data and I wanted to protect it, I think for a business that really wants to have solid performance, do a lot of AI, I think investing in that kind of money in a server, that's not too weird, right? Like it's like even Windows servers or Linux servers, if you want to have high-grade machines with redundancy, like you're going to be in the same ballpark, right? If you're used to buying $600 Mac Minis, well, yes, this is different, right? So keep that in mind. Then, is there a question?
Yes. How much does it cost to rent a server capable of running AI models? So if you didn't want to.
I'm happy you asked because I was going to go there right now, right? Like people are reading my mind. Or
Always
is this
nice.
like an AI bot that we fed like all the questions ahead of time?
I've been secretly getting all the questions from AI bots and not real people, Wim. You found me out.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So this link is one that I sent you yesterday, Margaret, right? So
Yes.
so the next obvious thing would be like if I don't want to spend $5,000 to $10,000 upfront in a solid machine to run or to serve as an AI model server, can I put it in the cloud, right? We use AWS because we're a high-level AWS certified partner. If you use Azure Cloud or Google's Cloud, same thing, right? Like the principle, although I'll be showing you AWS examples, but the principle is the same, right? Keep in mind, you'll need a machine that has GPUs, right? You got to start your search with that one. Like a T3 or a T4 or a T4G, like what you would use typically for a FileMaker server, it's not going to work because it doesn't have GPUs, right? So that is the main thing to go look for. And if you use something like Vantage, you can find the information from AWS directly on their side. But I kind of like this one because it lets you put in these filters, right? Like if I filter on all the AWS instance types that have at least one GPU, which is what I'm doing over here, right? Then you can see the instance types that are there. And very quickly, you'll spot that by and large, they break down in the G family and the P family, right? G or P family instances, and that'll give you a hint as to go find the pricing for these things, right? So, oh yeah, so GPU model, and then the next thing that you'll need to go look for is how much GPU memory. Remember, right? So we're talking at this point, we're not talking about Apple hardware. This is Windows or it's Linux, meaning it's got to have NVIDIA hardware. Right? Those graphics cards, and it's the memory on those graphics cards that will determine how much usable video memory you have to load these models and operate them efficiently, right? So this is going to be beyond finding machines with GPUs. And the next one is going to be like, all right, filter down to all the machines that have whatever your minimum number is, and this is not a high number, right? So 48 gigs of RAM, that's not a high number, but right, because my Mac Studio had 128. But it gives you some information. So the two that I have highlighted are machines that I would probably not go lower than these, right? With 64 gigs of memory and 96 gigs of memory, that's sort of like for me the level at which it becomes to become interesting. That you can load a model of a decent size, right? A model that's around 30 gigs in size is what you can load and operate with that efficiently. So then it really comes down to how much does that cost you, right? So we're talking about $4 to $5 an hour. If you run that 24 hours a day, that costs you, well, let's round it to say $100 a day, right? Times 30, if you're running 24/7, you're talking about $3,000 a month. And of course, maybe it doesn't need to run all day, and maybe you can get a reserved instance if you want to prepay some of that stuff. But you're getting the ballpark, right? Like you can probably get this down if you run this during business hours, during weekdays only. You can probably get this down to about anywhere between $400 and $1,000 a month.
When you look at it like that, buying the Mac straight out doesn't seem so bad.
Not so bad now, is it? Right?
No.
So this is how you do the math for doing that. And I'll repeat this a little bit because when we think just about cost of optimization, many people in the audience now may go like, well, OpenAI with so what is it, like $15 for a million tokens? That's not a bad deal, right? Right? Because it takes lots of millions of tokens to get to 400 or 500 or $1,000 a month, right? Or to get to the initial outlay for a machine that costs $7,000. Comes back to that thing, like how much is your privacy worth? Like how much is it worth to not be tied up in a data compromise, that kind of thing? That's really difficult to put a price on. But don't forget about those aspects. And again, we talked about this in the last couple of days, right? If all that you're asking is about the weather and formatting a document and there's nothing sensitive in the document, you don't need to worry too much about privacy, right? But it's going to be rare, I think, to deploy AI in a business environment where there's at least not some sensitivity about some of the data, right? So keep that in mind.
Yes.
So
Is this side note, do I
go
even
ahead.
want to know how much the 2000 gig one costs? Just because I'm looking at it. It's a giant number. You They're just floating around looking at me. Oh my
So this one here is a gig worth of RAM, right? And do we want to see it?
God. Sorry.
63 bucks an hour?
Whew. I know some companies definitely have the money for that, and it's not even like a drop in the bucket to them, but dang, that's a lot. We got a we got a question about the latency. Is the latency the same on the cloud or on premise?
The short answer, no, right? Because latency is anything between the client's network card, if you will, and the server's network card, like end to end, right? So there's lots of factors there that can impact the latency. But in essence, it's how long it takes to make a round trip or to make at least one leg of that, right? So if you have everything inside your own network and you don't do something weird like putting your server on a Wi-Fi card, like you got to plug it in. It's got to be Ethernet, right? The and ideally also your clients would be Ethernet because that's going to give you the best performance and all of that. I know that's kind of harder to sell, but your servers should be on a switch with lots of bandwidth and all of that good stuff, right? And remember, the AI model server, if you have it locally, everything's local. Like it doesn't call the internet, right? Even if you host a Cohere model or an Anthropic model, it doesn't call to Anthropic. It's the model, the binary file is right there, right? So your latency is bound to be a whole lot less if you do it locally than if you have to go out to OpenAI or anything like that, right? Um, so you basically cut out anything that leaves your network and all the latency that comes with that.
All right, there you go. Yeah, another good reason to be on premise.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Hmm.
Right. So at this point, we talked about has it ever struck you that so many of these icons are blue and like
Yes.
it
I get
for
that
some
blue is a
reason I'm
soothing
going like,
color, but I wish they
yeah,
would pick another one.
you would think so, right? Uh, what we're looking at here is a draft of a blog post that I'm writing, and I'm hoping to finish it next week. And this is sort of like a bit of a running joke between Margaret and me because I've been talking about this since the beginning of the week and haven't written a word on this sense. But um, for me, this speaks to that basic skill that as developers will need to know. Again, deployment options, right? We need to know what our options are, what the consequences for each one of those are. We talked about commercial providers. They're there. We know what they cost. We also know what the consequence of that is. You're sending data, potentially intellectual property. Take that into account when you make that consideration, right? Uh, if you don't like that, and again, remember your solutions, what you do with that can use a hybrid of these, right? At no point do we say it's got to be black or white. It's not like you can never use the commercial providers. You only can use a local one. Like it depends on what you're sending and what features that you want to use. So keep considering that you can do hybrids of these where you use multiple providers, local in the cloud, that kind of thing. Um, because the FileMaker features support that, as we've seen with multiple configure AI accounts in the same solution, um, right? So we talked at length about the Claris local AI model server and how to configure what it looks like, and we now briefly touched on what that will look like if we put it in the cloud, right? Um, it is what it is. Maybe you have the appetite for that. Maybe you don't. That's really up to you, but we've given you some numbers. The next thing really is to like if you really don't like that, right? What is the next option? Because you're not boxed in. Like it doesn't mean like, oh, AWS is expensive. I gotta buy a Mac Studio, right? Um, that's not the option. Yes, it's one option, but there's also this thing called serverless. Um, serverless is, in essence, that's what when you talk to OpenAI or Cohere or Anthropic, that's serverless, right? Like you don't buy a machine that they host for you. They basically handle the requests on their own infrastructure in the back end, and they decide how many servers they have and whatnot. Serverless is exactly the same.
You're just paying for tokens, right?
In this case, you do. There's and the example that I'm using here is AWS Bedrock. Uh, and let me bring up the price for that. Right. So, so sorry for the scrolling. Amazon Bedrock is the serverless offering that AWS has for hosting models. It's really that's the simplest explanation that's there. Um, and they can host a host, as you can see here in blue. They can host a bunch of models for you. Right? Basically, the same ones that you would otherwise go look for on Hugging Face to download for your own local AI model server, right? So they're pretty much the same. Plus, Amazon has their own models, right? Which you otherwise wouldn't get. But see if well, we can use the Anthropic model because that's the one that we used, right? So, and I think I showed this on Tuesday, maybe Wednesday, that the price per token, if you will, or per thousand or million of tokens is exactly the same as if you were to use Anthropic's own service, right? But this in this case, is the model is hosted by Amazon. At no point do you make a call to Anthropic or OpenAI, right? So I guess for most of us are aware that when you set up your account with AWS, you create what is in essence a virtual private cloud. Yes, it's in the cloud, it runs on their infrastructure, but it's still private, it's still yours, right? It's not shared with anybody else. Nobody else can see it. And plus, you have full control over anything that you want to encrypt, right? You own the keys. Nobody else has that, meaning that some AWS employee assuming that you don't use their encryption, if you take control of your encryption, some AWS employee cannot take your data and read it. Like they don't even have the ability to decrypt it because you own the encryption keys. So it's private, right? Not blind to the fact that there is an element of trust, right? Because this is not your machine at this point, right? And your data is going to flow to that machine. Do you trust AWS? That's what it comes down to. Do you trust Azure Cloud? Do you trust Google Cloud? If you don't, that's fine. Like I'm not making a judgment if you do or if you don't. But if you don't, then you're back to that Mac Studio, right? Because then you have full control over everything. But doing something with AWS or Azure or Google Cloud, for me, is as private as it gets. And having all the benefits of now going back to paying for usage. I don't have an upfront investment in infrastructure, right? I just pay for whatever I use. AWS takes care of making sure that it's performance, stable, scalable, everything that I need. If I make one request now or a million requests in the next second, they'll handle it, right? My Mac Studio probably wouldn't be able to handle me making a million requests in the next second, right? So keep that in mind. But yeah, so that is what it is.
So the limitations would be what? That you have limited models to choose from?
Um, Not even, right? And I'm hesitating because there is a slight delay. These Claude models, right? These are actually the latest, right?
Hmm.
So 3.5, 3.7, 4. Like if you go to Anthropic and you pick your models, these are largely going to be the same ones. But there is a delay, right? So Anthropic will develop new models and make them available first on their own service, right? Before
Got it.
they then basically package them and give them to AWS to say, now you can host them too. Just pay us for whatever your users are doing with our models. Because part of this cost is Amazon paying Anthropic for the use of the models.
Got it. Okay.
I had an unfinished thought there and it just flew away.
Oh, yeah, they do that
They
if you're
tend to
not
do
looking.
that.
Uh,
So yeah, if there's a question, let's take that first.
yes. AWS sales GPU computation?
Say that again.
Uh, AWS sales GPU computation? Question mark.
Sales as in SALES or
S
SAI?
A L S A L E S.
I don't don't think I understand the question.
Neither do I. David, do me a favor and rephrase that one for me, please. We do have another question.
Sure.
When I train a model, is it stored in the model or is it like a separate file and it could be backed up?
Good question. We touched on that a little bit in the last couple of days. There's really two ways that you can supplement your own data to a model, right? One way is fine-tuning a model. When you fine-tune a model, and that's really training a model, that's the same term, right? So you take a model that exists, and all models are generically trained, unless it's a specialized medical or legal model or whatever. But let's assume that we're talking about the normal run-of-the-mill models. They're generically trained. Um, you can tune a model, which is basically taking a copy of that, tuning it, and now you have a new version of that model that includes your data. So your knowledge is now part of that big matrix of numbers that is inside the binary file of a model, right? It's not separate. It's part of the model. It's embedded in the model. Uh, so that's one way of doing that. I don't think many of us will do that, right? Because fine-tuning a model is quite a specialized undertaking. So unless you already know how to do it, I don't see. I wouldn't even recommend that you look at that, unless you're very, very interested in the science behind how models work. The second way to do that, which is a lot more approachable, is to use RAG, retrieval augmented generation. And the FileMaker features allow for that, right? So in that case, you take a model and you upload data using the perform RAG action scripts that extra data gets embedded, so it gets turned into numbers because that's how models work. It gets turned into models, but it's stored separately from the base model, right? I think I can make that a little more clear by doing this. You can go away because I don't need you. So this is my Claris AI model server, and I mentioned yesterday there's a new folder here called FileMaker LLM. And inside that, there's a bunch of stuff. I'm going to screw this up. Am I looking at the right server? I think I'm right, looking at the right server. Oh, sorry. No, that's not it either. I'll come back to that. In essence, actually, I can show it another way, where it's going to make it a lot simpler. So let me log into my server here and go to right. So this, right? So it says whatever you feed, whatever you send to the server to be stored as RAG data, right? So numberized, if that's even a verb, the data turned into numbers. It gets stored like this, right? Nothing fancy at this point. It's just a text file. But it's an encrypted text file, by the way. So you can't just open it and read a bunch of data. It's encrypted, but that's how it's stored. So it's stored separate from your actual model. But the model can use it in essence, right? So because it's stored separately, that was part of the question. This can be backed up separately, so that you don't lose that stuff.
That makes sense, actually. Huh? Rick is busy making puns. Rick Kalman is busy making puns in my YouTube chat. You can tune a model, but can you tune a fish? As in tuna,
I
as in
can
tuna
I can make
fish.
a fish talk. And if people don't get that, look at the Claris YouTube channel for old Engage and DEF CON sessions. You'll see me make a fish talk. Hint, look for the IoT sessions.
Okay, now I have to go watch those. So I'm going to put that as a as a point back to it. And then the person who asked the RAG question said, "Thank you, good answer." So
You're
there
welcome.
you go.
All right. So, actually, no, I'll finish this thought and then I'll jump to another one. So, what we're talking about here, serverless, right? Meaning you don't have to buy infrastructure. You pay by the usage, and you get the benefit of this being private and secure. That's really fundamentally the next choice that you have, right? So, if we follow the trajectory you can use a commercial provider, you can do it yourself locally, or you can do it yourself locally, you can do it yourself in the cloud with basically getting an instance that has a GPU, or the next step is you do this serverless, in a serverless fashion. With Bedrock specifically, because there were a bunch of questions about Bedrock when we did the Claris webinar and earlier this week. The one thing to keep in mind is that Bedrock uses its own data format. If people are going like, what the hell is he going on about? Remember this, right? Any integration with an AI model is nothing more than an API call like we're used to, meaning that there's a URL. We need to send it a body in JSON format, and it's going to return JSON first and response, right?
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, Bedrock does that, except that it does it in a format that FileMaker by default doesn't understand.
Oh, okay.
Because FileMaker understands 3 formats: OpenAI, Cohere, or Anthropic.
Ah, and
And the
Bedrock has
custom
its own
one,
format?
what's that?
Bedrock has its own format?
Of course,
Of course.
Right? Of course. Why would people ever make it things simple, right?
God forbid we standardize. Okay.
VHS Betamax, right? All over again, right there. So, and we know from earlier in the week that if you pick custom, which you would have to do in FileMaker, right? If we go to one of the first slides, right? So inside FileMaker, very early on in your solution, you have to do this, configure AI account, and you got to pick which of these providers you're going to use, right? If you want to use Bedrock, you got to pick custom because the first 3 are for the commercial providers. That's not what you want, right? So it's got to be custom. And we mentioned during the week that if you do this, the FileMaker script steps will expect the format in use for the URL, meaning the v1 chat completions, the body that you're sending and the response that you're getting, to be an OpenAI compatible format. Right. So that's really what the expectation is under the hood. What that means is that you can't make FileMaker talk directly to Bedrock. You got to put a translation layer in the middle. Something that will take what you're sending, which is in OpenAI format. You're sending it that JSON body in OpenAI format. You're addressing it with a URL that is in OpenAI format. So you got to take something that receives that, translates that in a Bedrock call, Bedrock response, and you got to reformat it on the way back out, right? And it sounds more complicated than it is, but that's really the gist of that, right? So how do you do that? In my case, because I'm fond of microservices, I just put up in Node.js because that's the icon here for Node.js. I put up a Node.js microservice that basically exposes itself as a microservice, will respond to these FileMaker script steps, and then does a bunch of stuff under the hood. If you want to know what that looks like, that's really nothing too weird. Blue, 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 because VS Code is blue. There we go. Let's see what the magic happens here in these steps, right? I'm using the AWS SDK. It's one of the great things. Azure has the same, Google has the same. It's why I love interacting with these services. It takes most of the code writing away from me, and especially now with vibe coding, like it'll generate this for you, right? You can do this in Python, you can do this in PHP, you can do this in Ruby. Like this is not something that you must do in JavaScript. I just like JavaScript better than I do Python, but that's what it is, right? So I have invoke model commands. I send the command on line 169, and I get my JSON back that I'm parsing, and then basically sending back over. This is where I translate it into JSON that is OpenAI compatible, because that's what FileMaker, who's waiting for the response, is getting it over, and that's basically I'm sending it back over here. Right? So that's how I do it. If you do it this way, there's one downside to that, right? Although Bedrock is horizontally scalable, like it doesn't matter how many requests you send at it at the same time, it's robust enough to handle that. My microservice, however, not so much, right? It's still going to be a single point of failure at this point because, and I'm not saying that's bad, right? I'm
Mhm.
saying keep it in mind, right? If I look at the most typical FileMaker solutions out there, we're not going to be the ones to generate a million requests to an AI model server, right? Like it's going to be whatever it is, but it's something that you keep in mind. If it's critical, like if the AI functionality that you build is critical, you got to keep in mind that you're potentially introducing a single point of failure. Right? So, so this is what you do, and this is where people eyes tend to glaze over, right? Where they go like, yeah, you said it was simple, right? Um, Now it's not so simple anymore. So in essence, what I've done is I've replaced that Node.js microservice with three things. I I could have used two things instead of three, but I also want to keep my secrets safe. My secrets in this case being my Bedrock credentials, right? If there's stuff like that, um, I'm going to use AWS Lambda. So basically, that JavaScript code that I've written for my microservice, I'll throw it at Lambda, say you run that, right? And then the load balancer in front of that because I have to have a URL that would that I can talk to from inside FileMaker. All right, so um, um,
This
any of
is
our Saline Cloud customers know this kind of architecture well because we offer this as a package thing. Like our clients don't need to worry about that. We package this for and we deploy it. It takes about 5 minutes to spin up and away you go, right? And all we give you is here's the URL to talk to. That's really all you need. You're done, right?
yes, makes life easy on that end. I'm gonna ask a really noobish question. Are you ready?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you do this on the FileMaker side? Like, what if I interacted with Bedrock, like for example, via insert from URL, could I just make it so my parse was in the correct format when I handed it over to Bedrock without having to do this?
That's a really good question. Um, yes, right? Because all that would take is to go read the Bedrock API documentation to say, okay, how do I talk to you? Like what's the format of the data that you expect? And when you're done with your stuff, what is it that you're sending back? Right? So yes, absolutely. With one caveat, and let me bring up that caveat because we did cover it at some point. This.
Right, you can't stream anymore.
Yep. And streaming, for those who haven't followed us all week, is if you ever interacted with a chat window and you ask a question and the answer is kind of on the longer side, you'll see the answer come in like word by word, right? Like that's called streaming. That's what that supports, and that's a very specific subset, a subset, superset. Todd will explain that next week. Called SSC. The insert from URL script step does not support that, right? So it doesn't mean that it will break. It'll just mean that you'll you'll only get the model's response when the model is completely done, right? So depending on the length of the response, that may take a couple of seconds, right? So from a user experience point of view, the user just typed in a question, hit enter, and they go like, "Is something happening here?" Right? And then all of a sudden they'll get the whole answer. That's really the only difference there. The thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, you would just have to design like a UX thing that would let them know that they're waiting. Uh,
Exactly.
we have some questions about rags, if you don't
Yep.
mind circling back. Okay. Um, so is all your data in the rag text file? What if you want to use different databases? Do you have different names for the rag text files? Question
Nope.
mark.
Yep. No. Currently, the way that Claris has written this, and again, keep this in mind. Like this is V2, right? V1 was the one we had last year. This is V2.
Hmm.
It's going to get more sophisticated as we go down the road. It's you got to think of this text file as just one RAG database, right? Internally, though, it is segregated because you still have these keys that we talked about yesterday, right? Where every key that you generate has its own rack space ID. Right? So the data that gets uploaded by one key is not available to the other keys, but internally it's one single RAG database, if you will.
There you go. Uh, Can we directly use vector containers stored in Azure Blob Storage or similar as part of a RAG pipeline?
The answer to that would depend on the definition of directly, right? I'm going to come back to this, right? Don't forget about the streaming thing. This is what it all looks like, right? These vector databases have APIs. The AI providers have APIs. FileMaker is really good at using APIs. So if your definition of directly includes the ability to make calls to them and get whatever they're offering to do, then absolutely, yes.
There we go. Ha! Someone found your talking fish video.
All right, very good, very nice. All right, we have 8 minutes left. On to the last thing for this week. Actually, let me use the browser for this one. And apologies, actually, I'll make it a little bigger. This is not a product endorsement in any kind, shape, fashion, whatever. I'm using LM Studio as an example of other things that can act as a local AI model server, right? So we've been focusing mostly this week on the Claris one, the one that you install by running the FileMaker Server Installer and using the AI Services tab. If for whatever reason that doesn't fit the bill for you, again, theme of the week, right? You're not boxed in, like you're not dead in the water. This is just another example for that. There's things like this. Olama is another one. Jane is another one. LM Studio, you can see it right there. Let me go back to it. You have to get familiar with the interface, but it does the same thing as the Claris AI model server. And here's the thing, and I've mentioned this many times. If I go in here and you see the status is stopped, if I turn on this server, see these things here at the bottom, right? These are exactly the same kind of endpoints that it exposes like the Claris AI model server does, because this one too follows the OpenAI format for doing things, right? So chat completion, V1 chat completions, if I looked at say my, if you look at what's not Anthropic is a really bad example. This is my Bedrock model, right? So this is me talking to my Bedrock thing. You can see V1 chat completions, right? That's the OpenAI standard that I talk about, where the way that this URL is constructed is the same way that OpenAI does. I do have an OpenAI one over here somewhere. Yep, here, OpenAI, right? So this is the actual official OpenAI one, V1 chat completions, right? So that's what that looks like. So this one does the exact same thing as the Claris AI model server, right? So you always have options, and this does the same thing. It'll let you find models, download models, and then it'll host a model, right? So you will not get much in the way of, say, efficiency. Like it doesn't treat models differently than the Claris AI model server. Like it's not going to require less memory space or anything like that. That's really just the same. It's just a different way of doing the same thing, right? Where you can just expose a server that uses the OpenAI format for doing things and letting you deal with that the same way.
There you go. It's just a matter of what you are comfortable working with. So.
Yes, indeed. How much time? We got 5 minutes left.
We do somehow. The hour like vanished without me looking at it.
I want to call out I did call out early in the week, and we have the link that'll be in the session notes. These are a summary of best practice. I'm not going to read them out. You can read them for yourself. In that Claris knowledge base article that you'll have in the session notes, these are listed. If you're reading some of these and they don't seem to make sense, in that same knowledge base article is a long white paper that describes a lot of this in a lot of detail. And if you followed us for the whole week, a lot of the same concepts are going to be explained or re-explained in slightly different words, but they're going to be in there that you can make use of. In addition to the script steps, we actually have some functions. There's some really specific AI functions, but we have some functions that are AI adjacents that are actually pretty cool, that you can play with. There's one called Get Fields on Layout, which you go like, but we already had that. We've had design functions for ages, right? And one of them is called field names, right? So what's the difference? Well, the difference is field names gives you them in a return delimited list. Get fields on layout gives you them in JSON format, right?
Ah.
That's pretty cool. And this one is really interesting. Get table DDL. I'm sure Todd will cover some of the more specific features with actual demos next week. This one speaks to the fact that the FileMaker features allow you to generate a SQL query based on what you ask it to do, right? If you're asking, give me all the clients that haven't bought anything from us in the last 10 months, but in the 2 years before had bought more than $10,000 with us, right? So that's my query. So
Mhm.
the model can translate that into a SQL query that you can actually copy and paste into the execute SQL function. How does it do that? Right? The only way that it can do that if you tell it what your table structure is, like what tables do I have, what fields do I have, what data types are my fields. That's what this
Oh,
function is for. That's how you can grab that
okay.
data and send it over to the model.
Got it. So you'd start off with that function before you asked it any questions, so that way it knows what it's even looking at. Okay.
Yep, exactly. So if I bring this up in the data viewer over here, and go to my watch tab, I have mhm, interesting. Yeah, so here's the function, right? Get table DDR, table DDL, and I feed it an array of tables. It can be all the tables or just the ones, but this is the format that it throws this back at you, right? It's actually SQL syntax that you could use to recreate your schema if you want to, right? So it says create table book, create table this related one. Um, there's a couple of different interesting things in there, right? Like this primary key ID. How does it know which is my primary key? Because in FileMaker, my primary key can be any name that I have. Like we don't have a
Yes.
data type called primary key, right? And here's another thing, right? So clearly by naming convention, because we use the Anchor buoy model, right? So clearly the photo embed ACD, ACD
Hmm.
stands for allow, create, and delete. So that's just a suffix. But clearly this belongs to the embeddings base table, but it's a related table hanging off photo, right?
Hmm.
How does it know that, right? Where it says this, here's a foreign key that references the
And
other
it
table.
tells you what it references? Come off. Does it? Okay. That's kind of
How do you
insane.
like that, right?
That's insane. That's really cool, but that's insane.
Yep. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind when you do that, right? So if I like here, I have ID, right? That's my primary key.
Yes.
Uh, if I cancel this right quick and go back to my data viewer, come back to here. If I look at this is my book table, right? So
Hmm.
it picked up on the fact that I have an ID, but it didn't know that it was my primary key, right? It did for the other table, which is this.
Interesting.
So how does it know or not know how that happens, right?
Is
So
it in
there's
the
lots of cool things you,
comments?
you can do with this. So ID, if I go to embeddings, which is the other one, here's my ID. Here's the difference, right?
Oh,
Right.
it's
So I
looking
put
at. Sorry, go ahead.
Yep. No, that's exactly it, right? So by putting restrictions on validation rules, if you will, on my primary key, the unique thing is where it goes like, oh yeah, if it's got to be unique and it's called ID, because it has some built-in knowledge about typical naming conventions, right? Like if it detects a field called ID and it sees that it's set to unique, it says primary key, right?
Okay, that's really cool. I'm assuming if it doesn't have that and it's still called ID, it designates it as a foreign key.
It would only know which is a foreign key. Well, again, it looks at naming conventions, right? So if I
Hmm.
go to my embeddings table, I have these foreign keys. And that
Yes.
is a known naming convention, not in the FileMaker space, but in other worlds, right?
Hmm.
So it goes like, I'm pretty sure that that's a foreign key.
Clever, clever, clever. That's really cool. That's really cool. I kind of want to go play with that now, just see what it spits out in my current database.
Yep, there you go.
That is extremely cool. Okay. Could you send a purchase order to a model to propose similar products that aren't in inventory?
You most definitely can. Um, the To some extent, it depends on what sending a purchase order, like if it's a PDF or a picture,
Hmm.
absolutely, right? That goes back to that multimodal aspect that we said, like a lot of models can take different inputs. It doesn't all have to be text, right? It'll generate text, but the input could be any mode or modal or modality, if you will, right? So yeah, absolutely.
Uh, can you tell it the keys in the comments using the LLM format, which is where you put the brackets and then LLM?
Sure, right? Let's go, and we're running a little late, but I'm okay with that.
Oh, yes.
So if we go back in here, right? See that for the book table, these are actually all the fields in the book table, right? And you can also see that there's some meaningless ones, like the ZZ ones.
Hmm.
Those are utility fields. Like there's probably no reason why the model would have to know these. And maybe I'm just picky, right? So if you go into manage database, go to the books database. I'm going like, you know what? All you need to know is this book name. I can do square brackets, LLM. Oops, square bracket. I said LLM, and then this is the book's name. Change. For good measure. No, actually, we'll just do this one, right? So if I bring up that function again, right? So this is all we get from book now, right? So only the fields that I tagged with that square brackets LLM will now be included. All the other fields will be excluded. And
Oh,
see that they took my comment and added it as a comment.
okay. So once you LLM tag it once, it'll automatically assume that you are going to tag all the fields that you want, so it'll toss anything not tagged.
Yes, for the same table, right? Like it didn't exclude anything from the other tables, but as soon as one field in the table is tagged, you got to tag all the fields that you want to explicitly include.
Got it. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Um, cool. Uh, does get DDL recognize the comments? Well, he just proved it did. So,
Yep, yep,
yes.
yep, exactly.
That
Right.
was
So
that was the question, and then I processed that you've already just shown that, so we're good. Okay. I'm sorry for running you a little late. I don't see any other questions at the moment, actually, so I think I'm good to let you go be free. Uh, thank you for Rick Kalman. Thank you, Wim Johnny Appleseed Decorte. I'm assuming that you know what that joke is referencing.
yep, I'm not saying.
I wasn't asking. I
I know.
read it out
I saw
loud.
you looking. I saw you looking.
I was curious, but I haven't actually said anything. Uh, Seriously, Wim, thank you so much. This has been a really awesome series. I know that my knowledge about AI has vastly jumped. I know a lot of our watchers have. The videos that have already been edited are already doing quite well. A lot of people are busy watching and rewatching them,
Nice.
I suspect. So, thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for giving me all this time, especially since I know you've been hideously busy this week. And then good luck with getting that blog post out. I'm sure you'll get it when you're less busy next week dealing with our nonsense.
I guess now
So,
I have to, right? Like now that I've talked about it.
yeah, you've doomed yourself. You have to handle it now. All right. Thank you so much, Wim. Everyone have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you all with Todd Geist on Monday. Bye bye.